Good morning and welcome to another episode of Hot Coffee Consulting. I'm joined today by Colin Smith of
Morning.
Cambridge Data. Good morning. Welcome to Hot Coffee Consulting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for making the time, coming down here all the way from Cambridge. Look, I wanted to get you in and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Cambridge Data, the business, what it is that you guys do and what it is you're hoping to achieve.
Excellent. Good. It's good to be here. Do you want me to give you a kind of a snapshot of what we do at Cambridge Data?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That'd be
Excellent. So I guess on the simplest level you can think of at Cambridge Data, we help businesses to extract value from their data faster, to make better decisions quicker. Which interestingly, when I got to the offices here today, I spotted posters saying better decisions quicker, very similar to kind of the things that matter to us. Where we might be different from other organisations that are in the kind of data space, data consulting space, is that the approach we take is much more about a learning and development approach. So we don't believe that technology is the solution. It's part of the solution. Mm-hmm. Most businesses we speak to, they come to us and they say, right, we've got this big infrastructure project going on and we're trying to put all of our data into a data lake or some sort of central repository. And then once we've done that, we think behaviour will change. We think people will start asking better questions, or they'll start actually asking questions in the first place. And our experience is that that's not the case. The number of conversations I've had with the CIO or chief data officer where they've said, well, we did it and then nothing happened. Nobody used my shiny new stuff. So the way we approach it is people first. We think people make strategic decisions, people ask questions, sometimes good, sometimes bad, and people are the ones who ultimately, they have the strategic business brains. So if we start with them, we start understanding how it is that we can support them and guide them, give them the capability, the confidence to extract that value from the data, and then you think about putting in the processes and the technology after that to support those individuals, then it's much more effective. The way that we do that, we've built something called a data maturity assessment. Well, one of the challenges in this space is everybody goes, oh, well, we want to be data driven. You know, all the stats say I've got to be data driven, big great companies, all of that kind of stuff. But it's really difficult to define what that means. Data driven, brilliant. But what are the moving parts of that? What are the capabilities, the skills, the processes, the behaviours? How do we define what that looks like? So we built a data maturity assessment which helps you to understand where you are on a curve. From just touching, the beginnings of being data driven, right the way through to being so data driven you stop talking about data anymore and you start obsessing about other things. We built this assessment. It's free for anyone to use, so you can go online to our site. You can take it as an individual, but there's also a corporate version. So you can do the corporate version, and then you can cut that by department, region, seniority, tenure, that sort of thing. And what that does is it gives you the output of that. It says, well, on this dimension, so let's say culture, this is where you are. And here are the steps you need to take to improve in that area. So that's the first part of what we do. The second part of what we do is classic learning and development interventions, experiential. So we very much believe in blended learning, largely face-to-face. So we've got a set of workshops that we can deliver for different clients, depending on their need, their sector, seniority of the people. In those, we provide the kind of frameworks and the capabilities that are required in order to be able to do all this kind of stuff. And then the final part of what we do is data coaching, and there's a couple of reasons why that's important. So having been in learning and development now for about 8 years, strangely, even despite all my previous career, one of the things that's always bugged me, in fact, even as a buyer of learning and development products, is somebody comes in and does a workshop, or we get some training, right, or I take an e-learning module, and then once it's done, I might go, oh, that was quite useful. I might implement one thing. Chances are that may not happen because business as usual gets in the way. Nothing happens. So we were really keen when we developed this product, our service, that wasn't going to happen. So we hit upon the idea of data coaches. So what we do is we provide an expert in this area to a business, generally with a specific team, and they run regular scrums, so resolutely agile in the way that we approach things, and they embed the behaviours that have been taught in the workshop so that it becomes normal. Normally an engagement like that might be 3 to 6 months. And typically it would be a cross-functional team working on a particular project. It might be separated out from the rest of the normal functioning of the business to prove get the quick wins. Yep. And then if that's successful, which it normally is, then we'd roll it out to another team and so on and so on and so on. So that's the long description of what we do.
That's great. It sounds absolutely imperative for the time that we're currently in, and the clients that I'm talking to are experiencing the challenges that you mentioned, not just in technology implementation and enablement, but in people. And so you founded the business, correct?
Yeah.
And so what was your journey? What was your past career? How did you come to found the business?
That's a good question. So my background is pretty much all media and marketing, and believe it or not, it dates back to 1987. I couldn't possibly be that old. But I started out client side in a marketing team, and this was in the days, of course, before computers were on desks, certainly in that company anyway. And we were still delivering photomechanical transfers and 4-colour separations, which may mean nothing to you, but that was the way that copy was delivered to a newspaper or wherever else. And I did about 2.5 years in that environment, and then moved on to an agency. And again, so there I was much more like the classic traffic role. Have you ever heard of that? Well, I suppose traffic now in digital, of course, but back in the old days, it was envelopes with jobs in them, job envelopes or whatever, and then everything was done manually. And eventually moved into the media side, so media owner side, worked in magazines, then moved into National Press, Daily Telegraph, and so in '98 moved into digital. .com boom and bust startup, burning silly money, and got great fun. A couple of years burning 250 grand a month, and then slowly but surely made my way into kind of some of the names that you would recognise today, or names that were big in the past. So Ask Jeeves used to be the biggest search engine in the world, believe it or not, back in those days, and LinkedIn, Yahoo, AOL, advertising.com. Now moving into digital obviously introduced me to a much more analytic approach. Much more data-driven at the basics, and specifically advertising.com, an ad network business. It was the biggest in the world at the time. It was incredibly performance-driven in the way that it operated, which meant that we were, even in our sales approach, talking to clients, we were talking about S-curves and optimization towards, increase the cost per to increase the volume or decrease, and all of that kind of stuff. So I started to be introduced to that there. We had a big team of analysts. First time I'd really engaged with a group that was large enough that they could start on their own mission, right? Oh, here's the thing we want to prove. Not necessarily hypothesis driven, but I had the freedom to say, I wish I knew this. I wish I knew the answer to X. And that kind of followed me in a lot of those businesses. Yahoo, very data driven as well. But really when I got to LinkedIn, that's when I really saw the light. Incredible business, still to this day, of course. Obsessing about making good decisions at pace with ambiguity, so understanding that you can't know everything, but what we should do is put ourselves in a situation where we're constantly asking the questions, constantly coming up with hypotheses, and we have the data to support the decisions that we need to make, and we need to do it quickly because pace is super important. in that role, I had access to a data scientist who sat pretty much next to me, and a sales ops analyst who sat the other side, to the point where my team could make and I had to get through them to get to me. So on a day-to-day basis, I could sit down with a member of my team and say, tell me about all of these opportunities that you've got in your pipeline as in a sales role, and they would say, well, this one, it's 30 days old, and it's definitely going to close, but it's taking its time. Mm-hmm. And I would be able to say, well, statistically, there is no chance of that closing. So let's talk about that. Now, the quality of the conversation you have, when you have the data to back up that conversation, it lifts up an entirely different level. So I was really exposed to that kind of world, and really the geeky part of me really embraced that, but also the strategic business brain inside me really embraced that. The idea that I could leverage that data and add my capability, my knowledge, my strategic, innovative, creative brain to that just lifts everything up at an entirely new level. So I left there really with the goal to become a trainer. I loved training my entire career, totally loved doing it. And over the subsequent sort of 3 or 4 years, really started to ramp up my capability in that area, delivering lots and lots of different training, mainly kind of initially sales training around the digital media sphere, but increasingly that kind of digital transformation thing that everybody talks about, the most annoying word in phrase in history, training mainly marketers or traditional media owners to understand the context of digital. And my love of data and extracting value from data at pace sounds really geeky, but that never really went away. So as I was honing my capability in the L&D field, I was particularly interested in this area. And that's when I met my business partner, Jonathan Breck. So we co-founded the business together. His background, he built an agency, sold it to WPP, digital agency, and he obsesses about data as well, and probably has a deeper depth of capability in the data sphere than I do. Right, I'm all about people and learning and development. Mm-hmm. He's more on the data sphere. So the merging of those two backgrounds, obviously we kind of went, you add some value here, you add some value here, and we formulated where we are right now. So over the last kind of 4 years or so, we've been through a couple of iterations of the business to get to where it is now, which really have informed where we are right now. The type of engagements that we've had with clients. So at times we've had data scientists in the team, we've been providing those to clients. That has helped us to understand those challenges, those people challenges. Oh gosh, I've got a data science capability now. What am I going to do with it? I don't really know how to ask questions of it, or how to. I don't know what hypotheses I need to come up with. So we increasingly discovered that clients were saying, well, look, this is great, all the stuff that you're offering, but can you just help us do it, help us to know what these capabilities are, and we've formulated everything that we're doing right now out of that, and I think that the combination of all of those things is what makes what we're offering so compelling and so right for businesses. We've kind of found the sweet spot, if you like, of where people are right now. So that kind of gives you an idea of where. There's a long description, but passionate about L&D. I could talk about that for hours. Passionate about data, making decisions with data. Again, talk about that for a long time. Passionate about the people side of it, which I guess is where the L&D thing comes in.
So, in terms of the passion around data and data-driven thinking, did you always have that even when you were working in a more analog or manual world, or did that develop as you saw the evolution of the marketplace, new technology, new data systems, new platforms? I'm interested because I'm a digital and data native, and so it's always been part of my world, it's always been part of my ecosystem, whereas you have had to adapt and learn as it's been evolving around you.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question actually. So I would say first 15 years probably of my career, 12, 15 years, I don't think I was remotely analytical in any way. But I think the reason I wasn't remotely analytical was because I wasn't exposed to it. So quite often we find when we're working with clients, and I'll use this as a kind of an analogy, you have we'll meet an executive in a business, incredibly capable individual who has to make significant business decisions on a regular basis, who will say, I want to be using data to make these decisions. And when you ask them to explain what that looks like, they don't really know. They've heard about it, but they just get on with their normal job. They're probably doing 40-50% of the things that you need to do anyway, but they don't even know what that bit is and what the extra bit is. So if you think about that kind of an individual, and then you play that, you put that mirror onto me in my first 15 years of my career, I was probably doing things that might be in some way, extracting value from information, right, research, or whatever that looks like. But I had no context for it. In fact, people didn't really talk about data back then. They didn't talk about data-driven. You might get, what's your evidence to back up that recommendation? Right? That's about as far as you'd get. When I moved into digital, then I definitely think my early experiences there, they awakened the slumbering beast within. And by the time I got to probably Ask Jeeves and advertising.com, that period absolutely tipped. I was VLOOKUPing left, right, and centre. I was, my forecasts had equations, working them out, all of that kind of stuff. And I really loved that. I'd kind of spend hours building something that would tell a story without really realising that's what I was doing. I wanted to be able to succinctly get to here's my 3 bullet points, here's the evidence. And then the subsequent jobs just up a level again. So I think it took me 21 years to get to where I am now, but I think probably in a fairly short period of time, from just being exposed to the capability, I made significant leaps.
Yeah, absolutely. Just going back to the executive that is making decisions, sometimes data-driven, sometimes not. Do you think that there is, at the moment, and you mentioned it at the very beginning, often a knee-jerk reaction to have technology solve for those problems and for those unknowns?
Yes, totally. So I can use an example of a business that, I won't mention a name, but it's a retail business. The CIO spent 12-15 months on a technology project. Let's get some dashboard tools in. Let's get some good BI platforms in, and then that will tick the box. Somebody at board level has gone, I don't trust the data. It's not all in one place. Can we put it all together? They've done lots of really good work. They've built the infrastructure, but the approach has been very much an IT-led approach. Quite often, and this sounds harsh, but an IT-led approach will think about risk. It will think about the rigidity, uptime, all of that kind of stuff. And it won't think necessarily about how people use it. It won't think about mindset, behaviour, all of that kind of stuff. And his comment recently at the end of this project was, I think I touched on it before, this is brilliant. We've got this incredible technology and nobody's using it. You've got like pockets of people using it. That's very typical. I tend to find either one of 3 things will happen in a business. It kind of depends on their scale. Somebody at board level, or they will discuss it at board level, data's important, let's sort it out. Give it to the CIO, right? Yep. CIO gets it. Quite a lot of the time it might just be finance. So I spoke to one large supermarket chain, and I asked 3 executives from there in some sort of pre-interviews who owns data in the business, and they said finance. Right, so you get finance or IT might own it. So they go, right, you sort it out, off you go. Or they'll go, like the early days of digital, there's an intern in the corner downstairs. They're quite good with a spreadsheet, let's give it to them, right? And then there's a project, and if they're really good and really enthusiastic and great stakeholder management, it might take off. So you get these kind of classic scenarios where they'll kind of build the business. The third option is that they bring in a data scientist. We just hire one, costs them 130 grand, put them in. Data scientist gets in and goes, right, what are you trying to solve for? I don't know. You're going to sort that out, aren't you? So these things, it's the shiny new thing. Everyone gets excited about it. It's like social was a few years ago, mobile, all those big, exciting hits. I contrast that with actually the supermarket that I mentioned before. So at board level, they identified that data was one of the most important things, and they did give it to the CIO as a responsibility. We'd like you to take a lead on this. But the CIO immediately recognised that it was excessive building capability without understanding how people were going to use it. So the CIO of that business immediately engaged the L&D team, and they started by supporting the executive level. So all the C-level in that business went through some workshops to understand, level set themselves, because in pockets there were incredible things going on, and in other pockets, just that embarrassed executive that I kind of might be doing this, but I don't really know how. Level set, and then plan strategically for what they want data to be able to do for their business. Then think about process. Then think about rollout. Think about technology afterwards and how that will support. And then that changes how you structure the data. So I'm sticking with this example. So if you think about a large supermarket chain, you would have you've got supply chain, you've got marketing, you've got the people who own all the store kind of development, right? So floor space. You've got logistics. I mean, you could if you broke down finance, you break down the silos in which data exists. Then it's a super complex situation, especially in a really large global company. So how should, if you start with the CIO, start with IT, or you start with finance, how should they decide how to distribute that data, right? And is the way each function going to use it totally different? Now, some people, and by the way, we could debate this for hours. Some people will say my data should sit centrally, right, and it should be made so that everybody could get access to it. Some people will say it should sit in the function or the business unit that it belongs to. Some people will say we need a central data team. We need central data scientists, central analysts. We need that centre of excellence. Some people will say, well, we need them distributed. So we want, I want someone sat next to me who's going to be able to answer those questions. And all of that is super complex. I know what I would prefer pretty much every time, but until you go into a business and you understand what they're trying to achieve, until you recognise the scale of the business, the amount of data they've got access to, all of those things, then you're on a hide into nothing if what you're trying to do is corral it all together. Of course, the last option, sorry I'm talking a lot, is that you go to a consulting firm, and then 24 months, 48 months later, you might put something in. A good example of that is a consumer packaged goods company that I know invested a significant amount of time in identifying a data management platform, putting it in place, getting budget, change management program, implementing it, and then they were like, don't have a lot of data to put in it, and it's like, well, hang on, if you'd started at the beginning and then decided whether you needed it, then you might have taken a different approach. So,
how much of an opportunity do you have to actually change some of those fundamental business processes and structures? And so if you go into an organisation, as you've just described, and they have a governance structure and model that is fairly rigid, are you able to have those conversations with clients to restructure in the face of these new data-driven projects?
It's a really good question. So if you think about the way that we approach the issue, people first, generally means that our customer, our decision maker that we talk to, might be L&D, learning and development, and typically, it's not true everywhere, but typically L&D doesn't have a seat on the board, right? Your HR person, your chief people officer, or whatever that looks like, they might have a seat on the board, but L&D tend not to. That's some of our clients. Others of our clients will be the CEO or the COO or equivalent that's making that decision. You might think actually that if we're talking to the COO or the CEO, we have more likelihood of being able to influence that decision. Yeah, but actually, what we tend to find is that the L&D function, they spend a significant amount of their time and non-sleeping hours thinking about how to enhance the capability of their leadership team and to support them in the actions that they need to take. So generally, either way, we end up starting with some sort of leadership engagement. And in that scenario, in the larger businesses like the supermarket that I described before, it's not going to change overnight. So you need to, as I said before, often these executives, they're not there because they're idiots. They just need to understand the context, understand what's possible, and then they can make those decisions. So if you provide that, which is what we tend to do, then they can then build on that, and we can support in little pockets here and there, or we can help that scale, which then allows that to expand. In smaller businesses, again, if you engage in the leadership team, you do a 1 or 2 day strategic planning session, scenario planning session. By the end of it, they come out with a roadmap. Hopefully off you go, and that should do it. So it kind of depends on scale, but I think the very fact that it has become one of those board level talking points, right? You see all the Gartner stats. What are the things that people are talking about at board? All the different McKinseys and what have you. It's generally one of the top 5 things. We've got to extract value from our data better, or it's a significant part of the digital transformation that they recognise they need to go on.
Do you ever find yourself in a position where you may be a turkey voting for Christmas with respects to not having maybe the business in a necessary position to deploy technology or to go on that path, that journey towards becoming more data driven? If you isolate that fairly early on in your engagement, do you ever have to cut your engagement short or alter the structure of it?
It's a really good question. So I've run workshops where it's fairly obvious 40 to 50% of the room aren't going to really follow up, which might suggest my workshop isn't very good. But it's more, if the culture of the business, if the existing workforce, if they've been through a lot of change, they're resistant to change, this is yet another thing, then you come out of it and you think, gosh, this one's going to take a long time, which makes it more challenging. But those scenarios where we've already been engaged, so if leadership are committed, truly committed to embedding this sort of behaviour, then those laggards, the resistors, will eventually either shift or be rooted out in that sort of situation. Where you sort of building on that sort of a little bit more, it's when we've got the engagement in the first place, the client hasn't said yes, we'll do it, and you experience that resistance from them. So my principles are, I've never seen the point of selling something to somebody that doesn't want it, right, or need it. sometimes you have a conversation with smart folks who need it but definitely don't want it. And in that case, I think, you know, I'd rather put those to one side, because it is a commitment thing. 9 times, and having been in digital transformation kind of L&D for however long, and of course and data as well, my experience is fundamentally that if leadership aren't driving the change, if they're not pointing the way, if they're not acting the way that they want everybody else to act, or asking their employees the question, have you done this, on a regular basis, then nothing will happen.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, you'll get people fiddling around. A few stars will go shh like that, and everybody else will go, well, you're not incentivizing the behaviour, you're not modelling it, so I'm not going to do it.
And how do you, if you, for instance, begin an engagement with, say, a mid-level executive who's been tasked with this, or an intern, as you suggested earlier, how do you then root out whether or not the business and the leadership within the business is truly focused on this?
Okay, so it's a good question. So of course we have the maturity assessment. So that's already a good starting point. So to give you an example of how that might work. So I mentioned that there's the free version that anybody can kind of go to, but the kind of corporate enterprise version. So that is distributed to every employee within the business, no matter their seniority, function, whatever it is. And they're all asked the same set of questions. And we can then cut that data by, as I mentioned before, department, function, seniority, all of that kind of stuff. Now, some of the questions in that survey, some of the people receiving it might not even understand any of the answers, right? Which is actually something we get asked a lot, right? So, oh God, we can't send it to them, it will just scare them. But actually, knowing that they don't know the answer is incredibly valuable, right? So you send us out, you get the data, and then how we get the output from that, and then, by the way, that's just the quantitative part of the survey. So we also interview 10 individuals within the business, 30-minute interviews, right? So we'll pick, you know, half of that group will be from leadership, and then we'll pick specific functions, and we'll work with the client to figure out what those people are. We overlay those qualitative interviews on top of the quantitative data, and from that, very quickly, we'll get a steer, right? You'll know whether resistance is going to be significant. You'll know whether the infrastructure is such an issue that actually the L&D start is so too far forward that it's crazy. Although my view is you can start making decisions with data even if your data is in a mess, right? Even if you don't have lots of platforms and you don't know where it all is, you can still focus on the right things. So then we'll get a really good steer, and that's when, you know, sometimes occasionally you'll get a client who the output of the survey just says, look, there's 5 or 6 things you need to do. Until you've done those, right, let's wait. Yeah, let's put some deadlines on that, and let's have another conversation later on.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, our team is here internally focused on consulting with clients to evaluate, implement, and then deploy and manage technology on their behalf. And obviously there are consultant services that go alongside that, strategic and governance related. But I think that oftentimes the incentive structure isn't necessarily aligned to stopping and having a further discussion and maybe taking a different route to ensure that you're actually best set up to ensure that whatever technology or system or platform it is that you ultimately deploy is well aligned to the overarching business goals and the thoughts and the visions of the leadership team. Which brings me, I guess, to my next and possibly closing point, which is there was an article a few weeks ago, and we discussed this offline, about the oversaturation of technology and investment within marketing technology. And the prediction was that we were now at an inflection point, and that businesses were going to begin to divest their position in technology because they just simply hadn't seen the results, they hadn't reached the promised land, and that they were just simply investing far too much in technology without seeing the output. Would you agree that that's something that's likely to happen over the next several months or years?
Yeah, it's really interesting topic. So my view on the kind of proliferation of platforms and technologies is I think it's quite nuanced, this situation. So if you go back a few years, most enterprise IT efforts were about building your own stuff, and it would be some big unwieldy thing, and it would be written by some incredibly expensive business, and it wouldn't be particularly modular, so you couldn't build on it. So you have these kind of monstrous legacy systems, which, of course, as the business adapts at the pace that everything goes, they're not going to be there. So, do I believe that having the flexibility to choose the platform for the purpose, when a lot of the platforms are purpose built for a specific function or a specific need, do I believe that that is a good thing? As a person who, whether you Scrum, Agile, whatever, if I believe in agility, and if I recognise the need for adaptability, then being able to say, right, I'm going to use that platform for this, right, and off I go, put my credit card down, and that's my job done. So I value that, and I also think the flexibility of knowing that in that ecosystem I can switch to the next one that becomes available that's slightly better, as long as my the core data is transferable, which nowadays has become the norm. Then I get that. How that then plays to businesses having this insane proliferation of different technologies. There's employees are broken because they keep getting shoved. Here's the next one. Here's a training program. Here's a manual. Start using it. And I don't think that is sustainable either. What interests me is, have you heard of this idea of invisible SaaS? Did we talk about that when we spoke about it before? No. So that it's a growing kind of idea that so SaaS being software as a service. So I'm teaching you suckers, but invisible SaaS is the idea that if you think about what the technology is supporting, what the platform is supporting, can it be designed in such a way that it gives you all the value without all the work? Right. So an example of that, a lot of CRM systems today, they're trying to design them so that all the things that you do, the emails that you send to customers, the marketing activity, all of that, it just tracks it, and then you get the report, and then you can see from the data what's happening. I really value that. I think that's a really interesting development. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I wonder whether those sorts of invisible SaaS products will be like I don't know if an aggregation is the right word, but will pull together all of the nodes of all the other platforms that are doing other things. So if I've got, I don't know, marketing automation, CRM, email system, all these different bits and pieces, loyalty card, if I have one central invisible SaaS product that extracts from each of those, then I have the ability to shift all of those things to whatever is the thing that I need at the moment, or to add to it or whatever, and then I still get that core of value creation from that central piece. So I think that's quite an interesting area, area to explore. If I was in a business today and I was making those decisions, what would I do? I think I'd be trying to cut down on the technology that I have. I think I'd be assessing the value of it all, and trying to reduce it down to the core. One of the things I learned at LinkedIn from a data-driven perspective, which I hadn't really heard anyone talk about before, was the speed at which you need to cut stuff. and even in businesses like Yahoo and Ad.com, I'm sure that was happening. But we talked about, here's the data that proves we should invest in this area, or we should do more of this. What LinkedIn did was they did all of that, and then they went, but this quadrant here, this is the stuff we're just turning off tomorrow. And Google very active turning stuff off, right? It's the data that tells you, here is a platform we're spending this on, and adoption is this, and it's not driving that much value. Off it goes, right? So I would probably approach that in a data-driven way.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Well, coming towards the end of our time, before we end the session today, is there anything that you'd like to talk about? Any events, any press, anything like that that's coming around the corner?
Okay, thank you. Well, two things, I guess, maybe three. So, number one, for anybody that's listening that recognises these sorts of challenges, I would just say that you can start. Yeah, if you're thinking, gosh, it feels like a big hole of time to figure out how to make this stuff happen, there's actually pretty easy steps. Which leads me on to two, which is just go onto our website and try the maturity survey, have a go, get the output. So it's cambridgedata.com, and in the top nav you'll see data maturity assessment. So have a go as an individual, see whether you're interested in the output. And then the third thing is, if you want to know a little bit more about that, it's short notice, but tomorrow, 2nd of May, we've got a podcast at 1 p.m. And you can register on our website, and maybe I'll share, I don't know the URL right now, but maybe I'll share it with you afterwards, so you can share it with anybody who wants to join it.
Great. Well, Thank you very much again for coming in, Colin.
Thank you.
And thanks, folks, for listening.
Cheers.